Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The story began on a rainy Thursday evening in downtown Seattle. The air outside was sharp with the smell of wet asphalt and cold coffee. Inside a high-rise office, the glow of the city lights reflected off the glass walls as Alexander Grant, the 34-year-old CEO of Grant Holdings, stared at a contract lying open on his desk. His jaw was tense, his tie loosened, his patience gone. Across from him sat a woman in a plain blazer, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her worn leather bag. Her name was Claire Evans. A florist by trade, she had just received an eviction notice that morning. Her shop, Bloom Willow, was her life's work, and losing it meant losing everything her late mother had built. Alexander's voice was calm but firm when he spoke. "I can make your problem disappear," he said, sliding the contract toward her. "But I need something in return." Claire's brows furrowed. "What kind of something?" He leaned back in his chair, eyes unreadable. "A marriage. 6 months. Strictly business." The words hung in the air like static. Claire blinked, thinking she had misheard. "Excuse me? You are asking me to marry you?" He nodded once. "It is an arrangement. You will receive the funds to save your shop, and in exchange, you will accompany me to a series of public events. My board believes I need to appear stable before we finalize a merger. I need a wife on paper. Nothing more." Claire's pulse raced. It sounded absurd, like something out of a movie. "Why me?" she asked. "You could hire anyone to play that role." Alexander's gaze softened, just slightly. "Because you do not want my money. I saw it in your eyes this morning when you came to the meeting. You were desperate but not greedy. I need someone who will not manipulate me." She swallowed hard, torn between pride and panic. "You think I am that naive?" "No," he said quietly, "I think you are that honest." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The rain outside intensified, a rhythmic tapping against the glass that filled the silence. Claire looked down at the paper's columns of legal terms, her name already typed at the top. A lump formed in her throat. "There must be another way," she whispered. Alexander's voice lowered. "Sometimes there is not. I will give you until tomorrow to decide." Midnight. He stood, slipping on his coat. "If you walk away, I will not ask again." When he left the room, Claire remained seated, staring at the signature line that could change everything. Her reflection stared back at her from the glossy table surface, tired eyes, ink-stained fingers, and a flicker of fear mixed with something else. Hope. Later that night, she sat alone in her dark apartment, the eviction notice lying beside the contract. Her mother's favorite mug sat cold on the counter, the faint scent of lavender still lingering. She whispered to the empty room, "What would you do, Mom?" The next morning, just before dawn, Claire stood outside Alexander's office again, rain dripping from her umbrella. When he looked up, she was holding the contract. Her voice was quiet but steady. "I will do it," she said. Alexander studied her face for a long second, then nodded slowly. "Good. The wedding is in 72 hours. And just like that, two strangers signed away their freedom for reasons they both pretended were logical. Neither of them knew that behind those signatures waited the most real thing they would ever feel. The morning of the wedding arrived faster than Claire expected. She stood in front of a mirror inside a private room of the city courthouse, dressed in a simple ivory dress that fit her like a secret. The ceremony was quiet, almost too quiet. There were no flowers, no guests, only the echo of their footsteps against the marble floor. Alexander Grant looked every bit the composed CEO, his dark suit pressed, his expression unreadable. When the officiant asked if he took Claire to be his wife, he said the words without hesitation, his voice calm and even. Claire's reply was soft but steady, a promise made to survive, not to love. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Alexander slipped a thin silver band onto her finger. It was beautiful, minimal, cold. He whispered, "Welcome to the deal, Mrs. Grant." Afterward, a black car took them to his penthouse overlooking Puget Sound. The place was all glass and steel, sleek, expensive, and silent. Claire walked through the vast living room, her footsteps echoing. There were no photographs, no warmth, just immaculate surfaces. She set her small bag near the door and turned to face him. "Do I get a tour, or should I stay out of your way?" she asked. His lips twitched. "You will find your room down the hall. To the right. Dinner is at 7. Formal attire." "So this is what married life looks like," she murmured, half to herself. He paused, almost smiling. "Only on paper." In the days that followed, their lives fell into a careful rhythm. They dined together when required, posed for photos at charity events, and smiled for the cameras that documented the picture of a perfect couple. But behind the closed doors of the penthouse, silence filled the spaces between them. Claire spent her days tending to a few remaining clients online, sketching flower arrangements in a notebook she kept hidden from him. Alexander worked late most nights, his office light spilling across the glass floor like a warning. One evening, she brought him coffee. He looked up, surprised. "You did not have to do that," he said. "I wanted to," she replied. "It looked like you had not moved in hours." He accepted the cup, their fingers brushing. For a fleeting moment, his eyes softened, and she caught a glimpse of something human behind his walls. "Thank you, Claire." The way he said her name made her heartbeat shift. Later that week, they attended a formal gala for the merger announcement. The ballroom shimmered with chandeliers, the air thick with perfume and ambition. Claire wore a black gown Alexander had chosen for her. As they entered, she felt every gaze turn toward them. Whispers followed. "That is the new Mrs. Grant. She is not from our world." She held her head high and smiled, remembering his instruction, "Never let them see you flinch." During dinner, a journalist cornered her with a sharp question. "Mrs. Grant, how does it feel to marry into power overnight? Was it love at first sight or something more strategic?" The table went silent. Claire felt heat rise in her face, but she met the woman's eyes and replied calmly, "Power fades. Character does not. I married a man I respect." The room hushed, then someone clapped. Alexander's gaze found hers, something new flickering their pride. When they returned home that night, he poured her a glass of wine. "You handled that well," he said. "You did not freeze." She smiled faintly. "You told me not to." He studied her for a long moment before saying, "You are full of surprises, Mrs. Grant." The distance between them felt different now, thinner, fragile. And as the city lights glittered below, Claire realized that what started as a transaction was slowly becoming something dangerous, something real. Autumn arrived quietly over Seattle, and with it came a strange calm inside Alexander's penthouse. The first weeks of their contract had been all formality and distance, but now something subtle had shifted. Claire had learned the rhythm of his silence, the way he preferred his coffee black and his schedule precise. She even learned that on nights when the rain fell hard against the windows, he stayed awake in his study, staring at an old photograph of a woman she never dared to ask about. One evening, after another long business dinner, Alexander walked her to the elevator in the garage. His voice was low. "You handled the board beautifully. They were ready to eat you alive." Claire smiled tiredly. "Florists are used to sharp tools." He almost laughed, the sound brief but real. "You are not like anyone I have met in this world." She looked up at him, eyes curious. "That is because I am not from your world, Alexander." The way she said his name made him pause. For the first time, he looked uncertain. Later that night, she found herself wandering into the kitchen for water. He was already there, sleeves rolled up, hair undone, pouring whiskey into a glass. The man who usually looked untouchable suddenly looked human. "Cannot sleep?" he asked. She shook her head. "Too quiet. It feels like the whole city is holding its breath." He poured her a small drink. "To our perfect marriage," he said, dryly. She raised an eyebrow. "Perfectly fake, you mean?" "For now," he murmured, clinking his glass with hers. The air between them felt charged, neither cold nor warm, just full of something unspoken. For a moment, Claire forgot the contract, the rules, the distance. She only saw the exhaustion behind his eyes. "You should let yourself rest," she whispered. "Even machines break if they run too long." His smile faded. "I do not rest easily." "Because of her?" she asked before she could stop herself. His jaw tightened. "My ex-fiancé," he said finally. "She left when things got difficult. I stopped expecting anyone to stay." Claire's chest ached at the quiet confession. "Maybe that is why you chose a contract. It cannot abandon you if it was never real." He looked at her sharply, then his voice softened. "And you, Claire? What do you expect from all this?" She hesitated, then said, "A chance to start over. That is all I ever wanted." He nodded slowly. "Then maybe we are not so different." Days turned into weeks, and their routine began to blur the line between real and pretend. They had breakfast together, talked about small things, even laughed sometimes. The staff started calling her Mrs. Grant, not out of obligation but with genuine warmth. One afternoon, while arranging flowers for an upcoming event, Claire overheard two assistants whispering about the merger. "If the deal fails," one said, "the company loses everything. Even the penthouse might go." The words hit her harder than she expected. That evening, she found Alexander pacing in his office, the city lights flickering behind him. "You are losing the merger, aren't you?" she asked quietly. He looked up, startled. "Who told you that?" "No one. I listen." He sighed, dropping into his chair. "The board is questioning my judgment. They think this marriage is a distraction." "Then let us prove them wrong," she said. "Let us make it look real enough that they cannot touch you." He stared at her, conflicted. "You would do that for me?" "For us," she replied simply. The next morning, they walked into a charity event hand in hand. For the first time, Claire did not feel like she was acting. Cameras flashed, guests whispered, but Alexander's hand never left hers. When he introduced her to investors, there was pride in his voice that no one could fake. That night, as they rode home in silence, the rain began to fall again. Alexander glanced at her reflection in the window and said softly, "Sometimes I forget this is not real." Claire turned to him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe it is starting to be." He looked at her, truly looked, and something inside him shifted. The contract might have started the story, but what was growing between them no longer followed the rules written on paper. It was quieter, stronger, and far more dangerous than either of them imagined. The next month arrived with a sense of uneasy calm. The contract marriage between Alexander and Claire had begun to feel strangely natural. They shared morning coffee without words, exchanged brief smiles, and sat through dinners that no longer felt like obligations. But underneath the quiet comfort, something was shifting, something neither dared to name. One late evening, Claire returned from her small flower shop project, her hands still smelling faintly of roses. She found Alexander sitting on the balcony, his tie undone, his eyes on the glittering city below. The air carried the scent of sea salt and rain. He looked up when she approached. "Long day?" he asked. She nodded. "The usual. Flowers, invoices, and a delivery truck that broke down in the middle of nowhere." He smiled faintly, that rare, unguarded smile that made her heart feel unsteady. You always find a way to fix things. That is what I do, she said softly. Fix what is broken. There was a pause, heavy and warm. Even people? He asked quietly. She looked at him, surprised. Maybe, she whispered. If they want to be fixed. For a moment, the world around them went silent. The city lights flickered like distant stars, and Alexander's gaze lingered on her face longer than it should have. But just as something unspoken began to surface, the sound of a phone shattered the moment. He picked it up, his expression hardening instantly. Yes, he said sharply into the receiver. I will handle it. When he ended the call, his voice had turned cold again. We have a problem. The board is calling an emergency meeting. Someone leaked our marriage contract. Claire's breath caught. What? How? I do not know, he said, standing abruptly. But they will demand answers. They will think this entire marriage is a lie. Is it not? She asked, her voice trembling. He froze. The truth hung between them like a blade. It was supposed to be, he said finally, his tone low. But now I am not sure what it is anymore. The next morning, the meeting was brutal. Reporters waited outside the building, shouting questions. Inside, the boardroom felt colder than ice. A woman named Evelyn Hart, one of the company's most powerful investors, stood at the head of the table. Her smile was razor-sharp. Mr. Grant, she said smoothly, perhaps you would like to explain why your so-called marriage license was filed the same day as the merger proposal. Alexander's jaw clenched. My personal life has nothing to do with the company's operations. On the contrary, Evelyn replied, it has everything to do with it. Your reputation reflects on all of us. Was this woman, she gestured toward Claire, part of your image campaign? The room erupted with murmurs. Claire sat still, her hands tight in her lap. For the first time, she understood how ruthless Alexander's world truly was. She rose slowly and spoke before he could. This marriage was not about money, she said firmly. It was about trust. Maybe that is a language you do not speak here, but I do. The room fell silent. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. How noble, she sneered. And how convenient. Alexander stood, his voice steady but fierce. That is enough. My marriage is not up for debate. The merger will proceed as planned. As they left the building, cameras flashed like lightning. Reporters shouted, is your marriage fake, Mr. Grant? Did you pay her to be your wife? Alexander shielded Claire with his arm, guiding her through the chaos. Once inside the car, she whispered, you did not have to defend me like that. Yes, I did, he said simply. Because they were wrong about you. That night, silence filled the penthouse. Claire stood by the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. Alexander approached, his reflection merging with hers in the pain. You should not have to go through this, he said quietly. You did not sign up for humiliation. She turned to face him. Neither did you. For a long moment, they just stood there, two people trapped by choices that had once seemed logical. Then Alexander said something she did not expect. The contract, he whispered. It ends next week. But I do not want it to. Her heart skipped. Why? His answer came like a confession. Because somewhere along the way, pretending stopped feeling like pretending. The words hung in the air, fragile and dangerous. Claire wanted to believe them, but part of her still feared it was all part of the illusion. Outside, thunder rolled across the bay, as if warning them both that nothing built on a lie would come without a price. The following week arrived with a tension that neither Alexander nor Claire could ignore. The news about their marriage had spread everywhere. The tabloids called it a scandal, and the board's confidence in him was hanging by a thread. Despite the chaos, they continued to appear together in public, their hands linked as if nothing had changed. But behind closed doors, silence became their only language. One evening, Alexander returned home later than usual, his face pale from exhaustion. He poured himself a drink, his movements slow and deliberate. Claire watched from across the room. "You have not slept in 2 days," she said softly. He glanced at her and gave a faint, tired smile. "Sleep is a luxury I cannot afford right now." She walked closer, hesitating. "You cannot keep fighting them alone. There must be someone on your side." Alexander shook his head. "Everyone has a price, Claire. That is something you learn quickly in this world." Her voice hardened. "Then maybe that is what makes you different. You cannot be bought." He looked up sharply, his eyes searching hers. For a moment, he seemed about to say something, but the sound of his phone interrupted. He answered, and his expression changed. "Evelyn again," he muttered after hanging up. "She has called for another meeting. Tomorrow morning." Claire frowned. What does she want now? His voice was grim. "Control. If I fall, she takes everything." The next morning, the boardroom felt like a battlefield. Evelyn's tone was sharp and confident. "The merger is failing," she announced. "Investors are pulling out. It is time to consider new leadership." Alexander stood at the head of the table, his jaw tight. "I am still the CEO," he said. "You do not get to decide that." Evelyn's smirk was cruel. "No, but the shareholders do. And they are losing faith by the hour." Claire sat in the corner, her hands clenched together. She knew the entire company was watching him fall apart under the weight of their doubt. Suddenly, she stood up. "Excuse me," she said clearly. The room turned toward her. "You are making a mistake," she continued. "You are trying to destroy the only person who actually cares about this company. You call him cold, but he has done more for his employees than any of you. He built this from nothing. And if you cannot see that, then maybe you do not deserve him as your leader." The silence that followed was deafening. Alexander looked stunned. For the first time, she had spoken for him not as a wife under contract, but as someone who truly believed in him. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "How touching," she said mockingly. "The devoted wife." But the damage was already done. The board members exchanged uncertain glances. Alexander's voice rose, calm and powerful. "You heard her. The meeting is over." He took Claire's hand and led her out, leaving Evelyn fuming behind them. In the elevator, neither spoke for a long moment. Then Alexander turned to her. "You did not have to do that," he said quietly. She met his gaze. "Yes, I did. Because you would have done the same for me." His eyes softened, and something unspoken passed between them. When they reached the ground floor, the lobby was empty. He stopped, his hand still holding hers. "You stood up for me when no one else would," he said. "Why?" Claire swallowed hard. "Because I see the man you try so hard to hide." He stepped closer. "And what do you see?" Her voice trembled. "Someone worth believing in." For a moment, the world outside disappeared. His hand brushed her cheek, and the distance that had lived between them for months vanished like smoke. The kiss was hesitant at first, a question more than a promise. But then it deepened, and everything unsaid between them finally found a voice. When they pulled apart, both were breathless. "That was not in the contract," Claire whispered. Alexander smiled faintly. "Then it is about time we rewrote the rules." But their fragile peace was short-lived. That night, a storm rolled over the city, and with it came another blow. Alexander received an anonymous email, pictures of their contract, scanned and ready to leak to the press. The message read, "One more step, and your empire collapses." He stared at the screen, his heart pounding. Someone close to them was betraying him. He closed the laptop slowly and looked out at the storm. In the reflection, Claire stood behind him, unaware of what was coming. For the first time, Alexander realized that falling in love had made him vulnerable, and now, someone was about to use that against him. The storm outside lasted through the night, but inside the penthouse, the silence between Alexander and Claire was heavier than thunder. The morning light found him still sitting at his desk, the glow of the laptop screen reflecting the email that threatened to destroy everything. Claire entered quietly, holding 2 cups of coffee. She noticed the dark circles under his eyes. "You have not slept," she said softly. He did not answer at first. Then he closed the laptop and looked up at her. "Someone has leaked the contract again. This time they have the full copy. If it goes public, I lose everything: the merger, the company, the board's trust." Claire set the cups down carefully. "Who would do that?" "Someone with access," he said bitterly. "Someone who wants me out." She hesitated, then asked, "Do you think Evelyn is behind it?" His expression darkened. "She is the only one with a motive. But I cannot accuse her without proof." Claire took a deep breath. "Then let me help. You are not alone in this." He shook his head firmly. "No. I will not drag you further into this mess." She stepped closer, meeting his eyes. "You already did, Alexander. The moment we signed that contract, we became a team, remember?" For the first time in days, something in his gaze softened, but it was gone as quickly as it came. Later that afternoon, Claire visited the floral supply warehouse she still managed part-time. When she checked her phone, she saw a message from an unknown number. It read, "Meet me at Harbor Cafe at 6 if you want to know the truth about your husband." Her heart pounded. She hesitated, thinking it could be a trap, but curiosity won. At 6, she arrived at the small cafe by the waterfront. The wind carried the scent of salt and rain. A woman sat in the corner booth. Evelyn Hart. Claire froze. Evelyn smiled, sharp as glass. "Mrs. Grant," she said smoothly. "Or should I say, Mrs. Temporary Grant?" Claire's voice was tight. "What do you want?" Evelyn leaned forward. "To make you a deal. Leave him. Walk away quietly, and I will make sure your flower shop is funded for life. Refuse, and that contract you both signed becomes tomorrow's headline." Claire's hands clenched. "Why are you doing this?" Evelyn's eyes glittered. "Because he took what was mine. I built this company with him, and he pushed me out when I refused to play by his rules. He thinks he can win with a florist? Let him try." Claire stood, her voice steady but cold. "You are wrong about him. He may be many things, but he does not deserve you." Evelyn laughed softly. "We will see." That night, Claire returned home late. Alexander was waiting, pacing the living room. "Where were you?" he demanded. "I was worried." "I went to meet Evelyn," she admitted. His face went pale. "You what?" "She wanted me to walk away," Claire said. "She offered me money to leave you." "And what did you say?" he asked quietly. She looked straight at him. "I said no." He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "You should not have gone. She is dangerous." Claire's tone hardened. "So are lies, Alexander. You promised transparency, remember? If we are going to survive this, we cannot hide from each other." He stared at her for a long moment before nodding slowly. "You are right. I will not hide anymore." He went to his office and returned with a small black folder. "You deserve to know the truth," he said. "The merger, this entire planet is not just about business. It is about redemption. My father lost everything to Evelyn's family years ago. This was my way of reclaiming what he built." Claire blinked. "So this was never about appearances. It was about revenge. It started that way, he said quietly. But then you happened. You changed everything. Her throat tightened. And now? Now, he said, I just want to protect you. Suddenly, his phone rang. He glanced at the screen and froze. The contract has been published, he whispered. Claire's heart sank. Within hours, every major news outlet was reporting it, CEO's marriage a lie, Grant Holdings built on deception. The media storm was brutal. By morning, protesters stood outside the building, and investors were pulling out. When Alexander arrived at the office, security guards were already escorting people out. Evelyn's smug face appeared in the crowd. I told you, she said softly as he passed. Empires built on lies always crumble. That evening, Claire found him on the balcony, staring at the city below, the skyline flickering like a dying flame. She wrapped a blanket around his shoulders and said, then we will rebuild. The right way. He looked at her, broken but alive. Even if we lose everything? She nodded. Some things are worth starting over for. For the first time, Alexander smiled through the exhaustion. The rain began to fall again, washing the glass clean as if the city itself was offering them a second chance. The following days were chaos. Reporters camped outside the building, shouting questions that echoed through the glass walls. The company's stocks dropped overnight, and Alexander's name was on every headline. Claire stayed by his side, even when the board demanded his resignation. He refused to step down, standing before them with the same quiet conviction that had once built his empire. I will not walk away, he said firmly. Not until the truth is known. But behind that strength, exhaustion was eating away at him. That evening, Claire found him alone in his office, the lights dim, his hands trembling slightly as he stared at a photo of his late father. He would be ashamed of me, Alexander said quietly. Claire stepped closer. No. He would be proud that you fought back. He looked up at her, his voice breaking. Everything I built it was supposed to make him proud. Now it is all ashes. She placed her hand on his. Then we will plant something new in the ashes. Something honest. His gaze softened. You still believe in me? Always, she said simply. The next morning, Alexander called a press conference. The cameras flashed as he walked to the podium, Claire standing quietly at his side. He took a deep breath before speaking. The rumors are true, he began. The marriage started as a contract. I will not deny that. But what began as a deal became something real. I made mistakes, but I will not hide them. I am stepping down as CEO until the investigation is complete. Gasps filled the room, but his voice did not waver. This company will survive because it was never about one man. It was about the people who believed in it. As he finished, the crowd erupted with questions, but he walked away without answering a single one. Outside, the air was cold, the sky gray. Claire followed him into the waiting car. Neither spoke until the city lights began to blur through the rain. You did the right thing, she said softly. You told the truth. He turned to her, his eyes tired but calm. And lost everything. Not everything, she whispered. You still have me. He reached for her hand, holding it tightly, as if afraid it would disappear. Weeks passed, and the world slowly moved on. The company began rebuilding under interim leadership, and the media's attention shifted elsewhere. Alexander sold his penthouse and bought a smaller home near the waterfront, far from the noise. Claire filled it with color flowers, sketches, and sunlight. One afternoon, as they stood watching the tide roll in, Alexander spoke quietly. I thought I had to be untouchable to be strong. But you taught me something different. She smiled. And what is that? That real strength is not in power. It is in forgiveness. She leaned against him, the wind carrying the scent of salt and hope. For the first time in months, there was peace. But neither of them knew that Evelyn was not finished. Across the city, she sat in her corner office, watching a news report about Alexander's resignation. A slow, cold smile spread across her face. "Let him rest," she murmured. "Because the real game is just beginning." It was early spring when the first signs of betrayal surfaced again. Alexander had started consulting for smaller companies, quietly rebuilding his reputation one project at a time. Claire continued running her flower shop, and for a while, peace seemed possible. But one morning, as Alexander was reviewing new contracts in his modest office near the harbor, his phone buzzed with a message from an old colleague. It read, "You need to see this. Evelyn Hart has just announced her takeover of Grant Holdings." His heart stopped. Evelyn had used the chaos he left behind to buy controlling shares through a shell company. By noon, she was the new CEO. Claire found him sitting motionless at his desk, the color drained from his face. "Alexander," she said softly, "what happened?" He looked at her, voice hollow. "She won." Claire's eyes flashed with determination. "Then we fight back. The right way this time." That night, they worked side by side at the kitchen table, gathering evidence: old emails, transactions, and meeting records. Claire remembered every document she had seen during those long nights at the penthouse, every signature Evelyn had forced him to make under pressure. Together, they pieced together a timeline of deceit. Days turned into weeks, and finally, they had enough proof. Claire reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "You are going to clear your name," she said firmly, "and this time, you will not do it alone." Alexander smiled faintly. "What would I ever do without you?" "You will not have to find out," she replied. The next morning, they delivered their findings to the authorities. The evidence was undeniable: Evelyn had orchestrated insider trading, using Alexander's downfall to seize control and inflate her profits. Within days, the investigation became public. Headlines once again bore his name, but this time the tone was different. "Former CEO vindicated," one paper read. Alexander stood before the courthouse as cameras surrounded him, but instead of shame, there was calm in his eyes. Claire stood beside him, her hand in his, her expression proud. "You always said truth was weakness," she whispered. "Still think so?" He turned to her, smiling for the first time in months. "No. Truth is freedom." Evelyn was arrested later that week. The footage of her being escorted from the building played on every channel. The empire she tried to steal was gone, dismantled piece by piece. That evening, Alexander and Claire returned to their small home by the water. The sun was setting, painting the sky in gold and coral hues. He stood on the porch, watching the light fade over the waves. "It is over," he said quietly. Claire walked up behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "No," she whispered, "it is just beginning." He turned to face her, his eyes reflecting the soft glow of twilight. "I have spent my whole life fighting for power, for legacy," he said. "But none of it ever mattered until you." Claire smiled, her voice tender. "Then stop fighting and start living." For the first time, he did. He pulled her close, their foreheads touching as the wind rustled through the flowers she had planted near the steps. Somewhere in the distance, the faint hum of the city faded into silence. They had lost everything money could buy, but gained something no contract could ever create: love built on truth. A full year passed before Alexander ever set foot inside a boardroom again. This time, he was not there to take back power but to announce the creation of something new: the Grant Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to supporting small businesses and community artists. The same people who had once doubted him now applauded his transformation. But when reporters asked him about his return to the spotlight, his answer was simple: "Success means nothing if it is not built on truth." "I learned that the hard way." Claire watched from the back of the room, pride softening every line of her face. When the applause faded, Alexander found her waiting by the door, holding a small bouquet of white lilies. "You did it," she said. "We did it," he corrected, taking her hand. Months later, the foundation opened its first training center near the harbor, not far from their home. Claire had designed the gardens herself, filling the space with bright flowers and winding paths that overlooked the sea. On the day of the grand opening, the city was bathed in golden light. Volunteers moved between tables, children laughed, and musicians played under white canopies. As Alexander gave his speech, his voice carried across the crowd. This place is for those who have been told they are not enough. For those who lost everything but refused to give up. Because sometimes the end of one dream is just the beginning of something real. When he finished, the crowd rose in applause, and Claire walked onto the stage beside him. Instead of another announcement, Alexander turned to her with a small velvet box in his hand. The crowd hushed as he opened it to reveal a simple gold ring, the same design as the one from their contract, only this time engraved with her initials. "The first time I gave you a ring, it was a deal," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "This time, it is a promise. No signatures. No terms. Just forever." Claire's eyes filled with tears. "Are you sure?" she whispered. "I have never been more sure of anything," he said. The cheers that followed were warm and genuine, a sound that felt like sunlight. Later that evening, after the crowd had gone and the lanterns flickered against the water, they stood together at the pier. The air smelled of salt and roses. Claire leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. "The power. The rush." He smiled faintly. "Not anymore. I used to think love was a weakness. Now I know it is the only thing strong enough to rebuild what is broken." She looked up at him, her eyes shining. "Then we built the right thing." He kissed her gently, the wind carrying the sound of the sea around them. Behind them, the sign for the foundation glowed softly, the Grant Foundation, building new beginnings. And for the first time since it all began, Alexander felt free. Not because he had won, but because he had learned that real love was not about contracts or conditions. It was about choosing someone, every single day, without needing a reason other than the truth.